The morning that would change everything in my life didn't announce itself with fireworks or a blaring trumpet. It started the same as most winter mornings in Bangor. Cold air slipping through the small gap in my apartment window, the sound of gulls somewhere beyond the harbor, and the faint hiss of my coffee maker working its slow magic. I wrapped my sweater tighter around me and padded into the kitchen, the floor cold, even through my socks. The radio on the counter murmured the local news, a familiar voice talking about icy roads on I-95 and a coming snowstorm. 32 years old, single, and working as a medical lab technician at the regional hospital, I had my routines down to muscle memory. I lived alone in a small apartment near the harbor, just enough space for me and the quiet I often preferred. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I kept my expenses tight, my savings modest, and my expectations realistic. As Oprah once said, money can't buy love, but it sure can reveal who really loves you. That thought had echoed in my mind more than once, especially given my family's complicated history when money was involved. On the counter sat a small paper bag from the corner store, the kind with grease spots from the breakfast sandwich I'd already eaten on the way home last night. Inside, next to the crumpled napkin, was the lottery ticket Gus had handed me with a grin. "Feeling lucky today, Tenebris?" he'd asked. I'd smiled, handed him the cash, and said, "Why not?" Now, with coffee in one hand, I pulled the ticket from the bag and reached for a coin from the drawer. The first number matched. I frowned, double-checking against the numbers on my phone screen. Then the second. My pulse picked up. Third, fourth, fifth. Each one landing like a hammer in my chest. By the time the final number lined up, my hand was trembling so badly I had to set the coffee down. I didn't shout. I didn't dance. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I sat there, staring at the ticket, feeling my breath slow into something deliberate. Winning $9 million wasn't just money, it was a door opening, and I already knew I couldn't let just anyone walk through it with me. I checked the numbers again, and again. Triple verified, because in my world, one misstep could change everything. And then the decision came, clean and sharp. No one could know, not yet. Especially not my family. I remembered too many moments, alone, forgotten by my brother, an inheritance reallocated without my consent, the way my mother's affection seemed to swell or shrink depending on what I could give. Secrecy wasn't paranoia, it was survival. By noon, I had a plan. I dug my old address book from the drawer, the one with the names written in pen long before smartphones took over, and found the number for a lawyer in Portland I'd been referred to years ago. Discreet, trustworthy, and importantly, not local. I dialed and kept my voice low, arranging an appointment for the next day. No details over the phone, just, "I need to discuss a private financial matter." I paid for a bus ticket in cash. I'd travel without telling a soul. In a town like Bangor, secrets don't just leak, they flood. If anyone saw me walking into a law office, it would spread faster than the tide. That night, as snow began to fall, I avoided looking at the ticket too often. I stored it in a plain envelope inside a cookbook no one ever touched. My laptop stayed closed. I didn't search for headlines or advice online. Every precaution mattered. 3 days later, the first ripple hit. I stopped into the coffee shop on Main Street, my hands still cold from carrying a bag with a birthday gift for my niece, a set of art supplies I knew she'd love. The line was short, but the air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and that undercurrent of small-town chatter. I heard my name before I saw her. Thessaly Roan, my neighbor from 2 buildings over, leaned across the counter to talk to the barista. "You know, that youngest Sloan girl, still leaning on her parents. Can't keep a steady job, poor thing." The words landed heavier than the cold outside. I stood still, letting the comment hang in the air. The irony burned. I'd just spent my own money on a gift for her daughter's birthday last month, and here she was painting me as some dependent leech. I thought of Napoleon's line, "Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake." I ordered my coffee without glancing her way, the barista's awkward smile a silent acknowledgement that he'd heard it too. Walking back out into the cold, I told myself this was proof. Even without knowing about the lottery, they'd already decided who I was. Their narrative didn't need facts. It just needed to be repeated enough. That evening, I started writing things down. Date, place, who said what. Not because I planned to confront Thessaly, but because I'd need a record. If people could spread lies without reason, I needed to know exactly when they started and how far they reached. A week after my win, I took the long way home from the hospital. The air was biting, the snow underfoot crisp enough to crunch with each step. The harbor wind pushed against me, sharp and insistent, as if it knew exactly how the sting of that rumor had felt. I watched my breath form brief clouds ahead of me, dissipating before they could rise. I thought about calling my parents. I imagined the conversation, the half-interested questions, the inevitable turn toward my plans, and how they might fit into theirs. But instead of reaching for my phone, I kept walking. The apartment was warm when I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting me like an old friend. I made tea and stood by the window, watching the streetlights catch the falling snow. They didn't know yet. And that was my advantage. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. If they could spread lies without reason, I could only imagine what they'd do if they knew the truth. It was late on a Wednesday evening when I finally settled onto my couch after a long shift. My tea steamed in the mug on the coffee table, the faint scent of chamomile mixing with the cold air seeping through the window. I picked up my phone, intending to mindlessly scroll for a while before bed. That's when it hit me. A brightly lit photo dominating my feed, tagged by half the people in town. Lucan's birthday party. The table stretched the length of the dining room, candles flickering between platters of food. Every chair was full, except for one at the very end, empty, perfectly visible in the frame. The caption from Zarina was short, syrupy, and deliberate. Family is everything. The likes and heart emojis piled beneath it like snow on a roof ready to cave in. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling through comments. People from church, neighbors, old school friends, all chiming in about how beautiful the gathering looked, how lucky Lucan was to be surrounded by family. Not one person seemed to notice the empty seat. Or maybe they did and knew exactly whose absence it marked. I remembered that morning. I had stopped by my sister's house to drop off a wrapped gift for my niece. The driveway at Lucan's place was already lined with cars, but I'd assumed they were for something else. I didn't linger. I wasn't dressed for a visit. Now I realized I had walked right past the preparations for a party I hadn't been invited to. In small towns, omission isn't silent. It's shouted without a word. The next morning, I tried to start my day without letting it gnaw at me. I stopped into the corner cafe before work, craving a jolt of caffeine. As I waited for my order, two women I vaguely knew, friends of my mother, chatted at the counter. They didn't see me come in. "It was such a lovely evening," one said. "No tension, no drama, just the way family should be." "Sometimes," the other replied, lowering her voice just enough to make the words more cutting. "You have to cut the negativity out." The barista glanced at me, his expression flickering between discomfort and sympathy. I didn't step forward or announce myself. Instead, I let the words hang there, soaking in the implication. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a coordinated message. I picked up my coffee without a word, recalling a saying I'd heard years ago. Never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. By Friday, the exclusion had found a new shape. I was in the middle of logging test results at work when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of a local community organizer, a woman I'd spoken to before about health outreach programs. "Tenebris," she said warmly. "I just wanted to thank you for graciously accepting your family's help through the winter donation drive. It's so wonderful when the community comes together." I paused, pen still in my hand. "I'm sorry. Accepting what?" She explained, cheerfully oblivious to the confusion in my voice. "Your parents and brother made a generous contribution on behalf of the family to help someone in need this season. They chose you as the recipient. I think it's so touching. A public reminder that family looks after its own." I sat there, the words settling like ice water down my back. They'd painted me as a charity case. The same people who hadn't invited me to Lucan's party had gone out of their way to make me look dependent, and done it publicly. I could picture it perfectly. Garrick shaking hands with the organizer, Vianney smiling that camera-ready smile, both of them using my name as a prop in their performance of generosity. The local paper might have even run a blurb about it. This wasn't clumsiness, it was strategy. A power play to define me in the community's eyes before I could tell my own story. That night, I didn't stew. I didn't rant into the phone to a friend. I took out a notebook, one I'd kept tucked in my desk drawer, and wrote it down. January 14th, Lucan's birthday party, not invited. Empty seat and photo. January 15th, heard cutting out negativity at cafe. January 17th, call from organizer. Parents donated to help me. I sat back, tapping the pen against the page. These weren't isolated incidents. They were building blocks in something larger. I needed to understand how far they'd go, how they were setting the stage. The next day, I checked my phone again. Zarina's party photo had even more likes than before. Comments continued to pour in, each one reinforcing the image they wanted to project. I caught sight of my own name in a separate thread, people praising my gratitude for the family's kindness. It was almost impressive the way they were controlling the narrative. If they could control the story this easily, I needed to learn just how far they were willing to go. A few days had passed since the charity stunt, but the taste it left in my mouth lingered like spoiled milk. I had been careful, avoiding public spots where the gossip would be loudest, keeping to the hospital, the grocery store, and my apartment. But no amount of self-imposed distance could completely shut out the noise. It was a Sunday morning when I saw it. A new post from Zarina. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the gray winter light spilling through the blinds, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone as the kettle hissed. There it was, a glossy, well-lit family portrait taken in Lucan's backyard. Everyone was there, my parents, my siblings, their children, all dressed in cozy sweaters, smiles wide, the kind of staged happiness people love to show off. My eyes drifted to the right edge of the photo. I caught the faint curve of a familiar sweater sleeve, mine, but my face was gone, cropped out. The caption read, "Grateful for those who lift us higher," tagged with a dozen names. Not mine. A slow heat crept up my neck as I stared at it. This wasn't clumsy framing. It was deliberate, a surgical removal. In America, image is currency. By cutting me out, they were erasing me not just from the picture, but from the social ledger. I thought of something I'd once read. The best way to destroy someone is to erase them without a trace. I didn't comment. I didn't text anyone to demand an explanation. Instead, I took a screenshot, saved it in a folder I'd started on my phone, a growing archive of evidence. Later that afternoon, I bundled up and headed downtown to run errands. The air was sharp, the sky low and heavy, the kind of weather that presses on you. As I crossed the street toward the hardware store, I spotted Thessaly Roan, my neighbor. She'd always been the kind to wave from her porch, to stop and chat about the weather or ask about work. This time, as soon as her eyes met mine, she veered sharply into the doorway of a boutique, pretending to be absorbed in the window display. No smile, no nod, just avoidance. In Bangor, when someone refuses to meet your eyes, it means they've made a choice. And it wasn't in your favor. I stood there for a moment, watching her pretend to be interested in a pair of boots. Then I moved on, adding her name to the mental list I'd been keeping, the people who'd quietly shifted their allegiance. Rumors work fast here. All it takes is one well-placed story, and suddenly you're on the outside looking in. Walking home, the memory of Thessaly's cold shoulder stirred another scene from years ago. I'd been 24 when my cousin abruptly stopped speaking to me. No explanation, no argument, just a silence that stretched on for months. I later learned she'd been told I'd disrespected her during a family dinner I hadn't even attended. The accusation had been enough. She never asked me directly, never gave me the chance to set it straight. That was the way my family operated. Direct confrontation was rare. Instead, they let the social current carry the message. A cold glance here, a snubbed invitation there, until you realized you'd been cut off without a word. These patterns had repeated over the years, each one reinforcing what I already knew. Any perceived slight, real or imagined, was a weapon they'd use. And now, with $9 million quietly in my possession, I understood more than ever why telling them would be like handing over a loaded gun. I set my grocery bags on the counter when I got home and pulled out my notebook. On the fresh page, I wrote, January 21st, Zarina posts family photo. Cropped me out. January 21st, caption excludes me, tags everyone else. January 22nd, Thessaly avoids me on Main Street. I paused, letting the pen rest between my fingers. This wasn't about a single party or a careless photo edit. It was about control. They were rewriting my role in the family story, and they wanted me erased before I could tell my side. I flipped back through previous entries, scanning the dates. Each one marked another step in the same direction, a coordinated narrative. And with each page, my resolve grew sharper. If they wanted to pretend I was invisible, I'd let them. For now. Because the day I decided to step back into the light, it wouldn't be on their terms. Sunday mornings in Bangor had a rhythm all their own. The streets were quieter, coffee shops a little less hurried, and church bells carried further in the crisp winter air. I hadn't set foot in St. Mark's in weeks, but that morning, I decided to go. Part of it was stubbornness. I refused to let whispers push me into hiding. Part of it was strategy. If they were painting me as absent, I'd make sure the town saw my face. The church was as familiar to me as my own living room. The same wooden pews worn smooth from decades of use, the same stained glass windows that caught the light just so on a winter morning. People I'd known since childhood milled about, their coats dusted with snow. As I walked in, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Smiles tightened, nods came with hesitation, and I could feel conversations pausing as I passed. I spotted my parents in their usual place near the front, surrounded by extended family. My mother, Vianney, turned just enough to register my presence before facing forward again. Garrick didn't look at me at all. I paused halfway down the aisle, considering whether to sit near them or further back. Pride won. I slid into a pew halfway down, back straight, eyes ahead. The service moved along in the usual pattern. Hymns, readings, prayers. I told myself I was imagining the sidelong glances, but my gut knew better. When the pastor finished his announcements, Garrick stood up. "I'd like to say a few words," he said, already striding to the front. My stomach tightened. He took the microphone with practiced ease, scanning the congregation like a politician on the campaign trail. "Family," he began, "is built on mutual support, but that doesn't mean enabling those who refuse to contribute. Some people think family is a safety net to fall back on forever, but that's not how we raised our children." He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. His words were aimed with the precision of a marksman. I felt the collective shift, eyes turning toward me, some filled with pity, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. He went on, weaving a narrative about responsibility, about not rewarding poor choices. Every sentence tightened the knot in my chest, but I sat still. Never let them see you sweat. The saying played in my mind like a metronome. I kept my face neutral, my hands folded in my lap, even as I felt my pulse in my ears. When he finally sat down, the pastor offered a thin smile and hurried to close the service. I didn't linger afterward. I walked out into the cold air, my breath coming out in sharp bursts. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house to pick up a few boxes I'd left in the attic. The house was warm, smelling faintly of cinnamon, as if nothing had happened. My mother greeted me at the door with a too bright smile. "Your things are in the garage," she said, stepping aside. On my way through the living room, my eyes caught the wall of family photos. For years, my graduation picture had hung there. Me in my cap and gown, holding my diploma from medical technician school, the pride on my face unmistakable. It was gone. In its place was a photo of Lucan receiving an award at a business dinner, my parents flanking him, beaming. The empty space where my picture had been seemed louder than Garrick's speech that morning. I stood there longer than I should have, the memory of that graduation day flooding back. The hours I'd spent studying, the late nights at the library, the way my parents had hugged me after the ceremony. I'd believed their pride was unconditional. Now I saw it for what it was, transactional. I didn't ask where my photo had gone. I didn't ask why Lucan's was there instead. I walked to the garage, collected my boxes, and left without another word. Back in my apartment, I set the boxes down and pulled out my notebook. February 4th, Garrick speaks at church, implies I'm dependent. February 4th, Graduation photo, removed from family wall, replaced with Lucan's award photo. I underlined both entries twice. None of this was random. Each act was deliberate, a step in rewriting who I was in the eyes of the community. As I closed the notebook, a new thought settled in. I'd been absorbing the hits, cataloging them, waiting. But I couldn't just keep taking the blows. It was time to start shaping the story myself. If they thought this was the peak of their campaign, they hadn't seen what I could do when I stopped playing nice. By mid-February, the cold in Bangor felt sharper, as if even the air wanted to cut through you. That afternoon, I decided to do something I'd been putting off. Retrieve a box of my late grandmother's belongings from my parents' house. I'd told myself it was just a matter of picking it up and leaving, no drama, no reason for things to get ugly. The driveway was half covered in ice when I pulled in. I climbed the front steps, already fishing for my key. It slid into the lock but stopped dead after the first turn. I tried again, slower, pressing the key all the way in. Nothing. That's when I noticed the brass on the lock looked newer, a deadbolt I hadn't seen before. On the porch, pushed up against the railing, was a small pile of my things. My winter coat folded carelessly over a cardboard box of books, the spine of my grandmother's worn Bible visible under a flap, and an old lamp with its cord dangling into the snow. The bottom edges of the box were damp, the cardboard sagging. It felt like I was looking at the end of a chapter in my life, dumped there like the recycling bin. I knocked, firmly at first, then harder when no one answered. Through the front window, I saw the edge of a curtain shift. Someone was inside. They just weren't opening the door. I stepped back, the wind stinging my face, and understood exactly what this was. It wasn't about returning my things, it was a message, a symbolic eviction from more than just their house. I loaded the box and coat into my car, the lamp rattling in the back seat as I drove away. That evening, after a long, silent dinner alone, I curled into my chair with my phone, aimlessly scrolling. A listing caught my eye on Facebook Marketplace, a vintage oak chair in perfect condition, one I knew intimately. I'd bought it for my parents as a housewarming gift over a decade ago, the first real piece of furniture I'd ever splurged on. The seller. My mother's account. Curiosity gave way to unease. I clicked through her listings. There was the china set from my grandmother, the quilt I'd brought back from Vermont, even the small brass lamp I'd given my father one Father's Day. Things I'd chosen carefully, things meant to be symbols of connection, now reduced to price tags. They're not just erasing me, I murmured to myself. They're profiting off me. In American families, gifts carry a weight that's more than monetary. They're supposed to be tokens of care, woven into the fabric of shared history. Selling them off wasn't just about money, it was about dismantling the ties they represented. I took screenshots of every listing, noting the dates and captions. Into my evidence log they went, another page in the thickening record. I couldn't stop picturing the conversations behind these decisions. My father saying, "We don't need this anymore." My mother nodding in agreement, not just clearing space, but rewriting ownership. The next day, I sat in my apartment, still wearing the coat I'd retrieved from the porch. The damp hem brushed my leg, a reminder of how it had been left out in the snow. I replayed the scene, my hand on the unfamiliar lock, the twitch of the curtain, the silent refusal to answer. The imagery was almost too perfect. Wet, unwanted, discarded. If any of the neighbors had seen it, they'd know exactly what it meant. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind from years ago at her kitchen table. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. This was the first time they'd shown me this particular cruelty, but it wasn't the first time they'd shown me what I was worth to them. I began to see these gestures not as random slights, but as part of a coordinated effort, a campaign to mark me as the ungrateful outcast, the one who couldn't be trusted with place or legacy. The temptation to call them, to demand an explanation, burned hot for a moment, but I knew it would only give them another performance to point at. See? She's overreacting. So I stayed quiet, channeling the energy into something more useful. I wrote a single, deliberate line in my notebook. Locked out. Items discarded. Gifts sold. It no longer read like a misunderstanding. It read like strategy. This wasn't about bruised feelings or a breakdown in communication. It was about control. Over the family's image, over my reputation, over the story they wanted told. I set the pen down and leaned back, letting the thoughts settle into something heavier but sharper. If they were willing to cross this line, I had to prepare for what they'd try next. It was late in the afternoon when I got the message from Ilara Varen. I'd just finished logging a set of lab results and was sipping lukewarm coffee at my desk when her name lit up my phone. "We need to talk," the message read. "You should hear the latest family narrative." We met at a small cafe off Main Street, the kind with chipped mugs and booths that had seen decades of whispered conversations. Ilara slid into the seat across from me, her coat still dusted with snow, and leaned in as if she were about to hand me state secrets. "It's Lucan," she said, lowering her voice. "He's been telling people you owe the family money, a lot of it, and that you've refused to pay it back. That's why you were locked out. They're framing it as a last resort." For a moment, I couldn't even process it. I'd given Lucan money more times than I could count, paid off his overdue bills, lent him cash for his last business venture that vanished into thin air. Now he was turning those moments into a fabricated debt. Ilara kept going. "He's been saying it at dinners, community events, even hinted at it during a Chamber of Commerce meeting. Garrick and Vianney are letting it stand. They want people to see you as the one who broke faith with the family. It was a neat trick. Invent a debt, then use it to justify everything they'd done to me." My mind flashed to an old saying. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth puts its shoes on. I forced a steady tone. "Did he say how much I supposedly owe?" She nodded grimly. "Enough to make you look reckless, but not so much that it sounds unbelievable. It's calculated, Tenebris." I thanked her, though the words felt hollow. Inside, a different kind of cold settled. The kind that sharpens rather than dulls. I made a mental note right there. Find proof of every dollar I'd ever given Lucan. That night, I decided I wasn't going to hide. There was a charity gala at the community center that weekend, the kind of event where every notable face in Bangor would be in attendance, including my family. If they were going to smear me in public spaces, then I'd walk right into one and watch them squirm. The gala was the kind of affair people dressed for weeks in advance. I stood in front of my closet, assessing my options, and chose a deep emerald dress with clean lines, confident without being loud. A simple necklace, black heels, and my hair pulled back to keep the focus on my eyes. I wanted to look unshakable, not defensive. By the time I arrived at the community center, the lot was already full. The building glowed against the winter night, laughter spilling out each time the doors opened. I walked up the steps, heels clicking, and gave my name to the doorman at the guest list table. He scanned the list once, then again, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, Ms. Quaid, your name's not here." "It should be," I said evenly. "I RSVP'd weeks ago." He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "It was removed, per the request of your family." For a beat, I just looked at him, letting the words settle. "Which family member?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I can't say for sure, but it came from the top." Behind me, a couple brushed past, their polite smiles curdling into curiosity as they caught the edge of the exchange. A small group further down the steps glanced my way, whispering behind gloved hands. The cold air bit harder as I stood there, the humiliation deliberate and precise. I could have made a scene, demanded entry, forced them to deny me to my face in front of everyone, but that would have been exactly what they wanted, a public tantrum to fold into their narrative. Instead, I smiled at the doorman, though my jaw ached from holding it in place. "Thank you for letting me know." I turned, walking back down the steps, the snow crunching under my heels. The whispers followed me until the door closed behind another set of guests. Back in my apartment, I went straight to my notebook. February 24th. Blocked from gala. Family requested my name removed. I wrote down the names of people who had been within earshot, the details of the exchange, even the color of the coat the doorman wore. Then I flipped back through the pages, the lies, the exclusions, the staged humiliations, and began drawing a timeline. I connected the dots from the first rumor to this latest stunt, seeing the pattern more clearly than ever. If they wanted to turn this into a game of public image, I'd learn every rule, and then I'd beat them at it. They wanted me out of the room. They had no idea I was already building my own stage. The message came on a Tuesday morning, short and dripping with sugar. "Hi, Tenebris. I'd love to meet for coffee. I think it's time we had a fresh start. Just us girls, no drama. Let me know when you're free. Zarina." I stared at it for a while, the corners of my mouth twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. The tone was wrong. Too warm, too easy, especially after months of calculated slights. It read less like a peace offering and more like a carefully baited hook. For the rest of the day, I debated whether to ignore it. I could almost hear my own voice arguing both sides, one part of me saying, "Don't give them another chance to twist things," the other reminding me that knowing their angle firsthand was better than guessing from the outside. By evening, I decided I would go, not for reconciliation, but reconnaissance. If they were reaching out, there was a reason, and I intended to find it. I would be calm, watchful, and above all, I would not give them anything they could use. The cafe was one of those places designed to look cozy. Mismatched chairs, shelves of secondhand books, chalkboard menus, but the air felt heavy the moment I walked in. Zarina was already at a table near the window, her scarf arranged like she'd stepped out of a catalog. She greeted me with an exaggerated brightness that made the people at the next table glance over. "Tenebris, you look wonderful," she said, leaning in as if we were old friends reunited. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my voice even. We were barely 2 sips into our coffee when Lucan appeared, sliding into the seat beside her like this had always been the plan. "Hope you don't mind," he said smoothly. "I thought it'd be nice to all talk together." Small talk followed, the kind that was supposed to feel safe. Childhood stories, how everyone missed seeing me at family dinners. But the warmth felt rehearsed, and I noticed Zarina adjusting her phone on the table, face down, but angled just so. It wasn't hard to imagine the microphone quietly capturing every word. Lucan made the pivot I'd been expecting. "We've been worried about you," he began. "People are saying you're between jobs, that you've been relying on, well, other sources to get by." I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch. "Interesting," I said finally. "It's just, in a small town like this, people talk," he continued, wearing that expression he used when he wanted to look concerned but still superior. "We'd hate for anyone to think you weren't contributing. You know how much family reputation matters." And there it was, the rumor I'd heard in fragments, now laid out in full view, unemployed, dependent, exactly the image they'd been crafting since locking me out. I kept my expression neutral, offering vague, non-committal answers. "I'm managing. I've got things in the works." Every sentence carefully stripped of detail, nothing they could cut and twist into a soundbite for their next round of gossip. Inside, my anger was steady and cold. I could see the coordination, the false concern, the planted recording device, the seamless way they moved from pleasantries to accusations. When the conversation began to wind down, I stood, gathering my bag. "I appreciate your concern," I said, pausing just long enough to let my eyes rest on Lucan's. "By the way, I've kept very thorough records of our past financial exchanges, down to the last dollar." For the first time, his expression shifted, just a flicker, before he smiled too quickly. "Of course, transparency is important." "Exactly," I said, and left them sitting there with their untouched coffee. Back home, I pulled out my notebook and wrote down everything. The seating arrangement, the order of topics, the way Zarina's phone was placed. I noted their exact wording, especially the parts that could be construed as bait. In a separate line, I added, March 3rd, meeting with Lucan and Zarina, implied unemployment, possible recording. As I closed the notebook, I thought of an old saying my grandmother used to repeat whenever someone tried to fool her twice. "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." They thought this was just another step in their smear campaign. They didn't realize all they'd done was show me exactly how low they were willing to go, and how careful I would be when I made my next move. If they wanted a war of words, I'd make sure the last one was mine. Sunday morning broke gray and damp, the kind of March day in Bangor where winter clings to the air but you can smell spring fighting to break through. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one I'd been using as a war desk for weeks now. The laptop was open, but most of my work spread across the surface was on paper. Printed screenshots, handwritten notes, dated accounts of every incident. I pulled my evidence log closer and began sorting. Marketplace listings of my belongings went into one folder, labeled Asset Removal. Another contained transcripts of overheard conversations and social media posts, rumor campaigns. The third held documentation of the church humiliation, the party exclusion, and the gala block, public humiliation. As I organized, a quote from John Adams came to mind. Facts are stubborn things. I let the words settle over me. That's what I was building. Something stubborn enough to outlast gossip. This wasn't going to be a defense. It would be an unshakable record. I began drafting a narrative for myself, the kind I could release when the time was right. Not a rant, not an emotional outburst. A clean, factual account of exactly what had been done, and when. By Tuesday, I was on a bus to Portland to meet my lawyer. I kept the meeting quiet, no paper trail that could lead back to Bangor. In his office, I outlined my plan. Establish a charitable fund in my name, seeded from my lottery winnings, but without drawing public attention until I was ready. What's the focus? He asked, tapping his pen against a legal pad. Scholarships, I said. For local students going into medical technology, I want it tied to my career, something no one can twist into selfishness. He nodded. We can set it up with a trust so your identity is protected until you choose to reveal it. When you do, it'll be bulletproof. That afternoon, the paperwork was in motion. The idea that I could step back into the public eye with something so undeniably positive gave me a sense of leverage I hadn't felt in months. On Thursday evening, as rain tapped against my windows, my email pinged with a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Private, please read. It was from Ilara Veyron. We hadn't been in regular contact since the feud began. I opened it cautiously, scanning the first lines. She wrote that she'd been disturbed by recent family conversations, that she didn't agree with the tactics Garrick, Vianney, and Lucan were using against me. Then came the attachment, a set of screenshots from the private family group chat. I clicked through them slowly, my stomach tightening. We need her to look unstable before she can speak up. The gala block was just the start. There were even lines about coordinating stories so no one in the family slipped up if asked about me. They'd been choreographing my erasure down to the phrasing. I sat back, letting the glow of the laptop wash over me, feeling a mix of vindication and something sharper. Now I had direct proof, not rumors, not secondhand reports, but their own words. I typed back to Ilara, thanking her, but also asking why she was breaking ranks now. Her reply was quick. I've been quiet too long. They're going too far, and it's not who I want to be. When I closed the laptop, the city outside my window was wrapped in fog, the harbor lights hazy in the distance. I pinned the screenshots at the top of my evidence log and added a note. March 15th, Ilara provides direct proof of coordinated smear. Then I opened a fresh page and outlined the final phase. First, complete the scholarship fund setup. Second, prepare the public reveal, both the charity and the evidence, in one blow. By the time I poured myself a cup of tea, I could see it clearly. They'd been writing the story without me for months. Soon, I'd be the one holding the pen. The day after Ilara's email, I found myself walking toward Morwenna's bookstore, the bell over the door jingling as I stepped inside. The familiar scent of aged paper and polished wood wrapped around me like a blanket. The old hardwood floor creaked under my boots, and somewhere in the back, I heard the low hiss of a kettle warming. Morwenna looked up from behind the counter, her silver hair pinned loosely, reading glasses perched on her nose. I was wondering when you'd come by, she said, her voice calm but tinged with concern. I smiled faintly. Needed a place where I don't have to measure every word. Upstairs in her apartment above the shop, the radiators hummed softly. We settled at the small kitchen table, mismatched mugs between us. I told her about the trap meeting with Lucan and Zarina, the phone left just right for recording, and the unemployment rumor that had been slid into the conversation like a blade slipped under skin. "They're closing ranks," I said, wrapping my hands around the warmth of the mug. "Even with everything I'm preparing, it's like the walls keep moving in." She listened without interrupting, eyes steady on mine. When I finally stopped, she set her mug down and leaned forward. "When people are desperate to paint you as the villain, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let them finish the picture. Then show them the real one. That's how you take the wind out of their sails." Her words settled in my chest like a stone in calm water. Later, as the tea cooled between us, I pulled out my phone. "You need to see this," I told her, opening V&A's latest social media post. It was a photo of a rare antique clock, gleaming on the mantel in my parents' living room. The caption read, "A generous gift from a dear friend overseas. We're so lucky to have people who think of us." I stared at it even now, the knot in my stomach tightening. That clock had been mine, a gift I'd given them years ago, tied to one of my grandmother's last stories about her own childhood home. Now it was claimed by someone else entirely in the public eye, my part in its history erased. "It's not just the object," I said quietly. "It's the rewrite. It's them cutting me out of the story every way they can." Morwenna glanced at the photo, then back at me. "They can't touch what they can't prove they own in spirit. That clock will always be your grandmother's memory with you, no matter what story they tell." I wanted to believe that. The ache didn't vanish, but it dulled in the face of her certainty. We spent the next hour talking about timing, not just reacting, but choosing the right moment to move. I told her about the charity fund, how I'd set it up quietly with the lawyer, how it would be unveiled alongside Alara's proof of the smear campaign. "They'll feel most secure right before they fall," she said, matter of fact. "That's when you do it." The shift inside me was almost physical. For months, I'd been bracing against each hit, reacting. Now I could see the shape of what came next. Not just defense, but offense. By the time I left the bookstore, the late afternoon sun was throwing long shadows across Main Street. The air was cool, but the promise of spring was there if you breathed deeply enough. Back in my apartment, I placed a framed photo of my grandmother on the desk beside my evidence log. She was smiling in the picture, one hand on my shoulder from a day long ago. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line under my plans. Not for their approval, for my self-respect, for the truth. The harbor lights blinked in the distance as I stood by the window. They seemed steady against the dark, and for the first time in a while, so did I. The next time I stepped into the light, I'd make sure they could never push me back into the shadows. The morning of the fundraiser felt sharper than most. I woke before the alarm, the faint hum of the harbor in the background, and sat at my desk with a legal pad. Every detail of my plan was already burned into memory, but I went over it again, because today was my one shot, and there would be no do-overs. The scholarship fund paperwork was complete. The sponsorship was locked in under an anonymous donor, my identity shielded until the moment I chose to lift it. I'd told my lawyer, when it's time, I want it to be impossible for anyone to frame this as self-serving. He'd nodded and replied, "Then we'll let the facts speak for themselves." I checked the timeline I'd prepared, arrive 30 minutes after doors opened, stay for the early mingling, and keep my distance from Garrick, V&A, and Lucan until the reveal. I pictured walking in, shoulders straight, chin level, nothing rushed. "Success is the best revenge," I muttered, the words tasting steady in my mouth. By 6 o'clock, the town hall glowed against the evening sky, windows lit, voices carrying down the steps. I stepped out of my car in a deep navy suit, the fabric clean and sharp, paired with modest black heels and a simple silver pin at the lapel. No glitter, no flash. Just enough presence to make people turn their heads without knowing why. Inside, the warmth and noise swelled. I handed my coat to the attendant and scanned the room. Garrick was near the front, speaking to one of the town's council members. V&A stood close, smiling too widely at someone's joke. Lucan caught sight of me, and his expression tightened before stretching into a thin, calculated smile. I didn't give them the satisfaction of lingering. Instead, I moved through the crowd, greeting acquaintances, making small talk about the scholarship recipients from past years, the weather, the turnout. Every handshake, every smile, was a small reinforcement. I belonged here. Halfway through the evening, the MC took the stage. After the usual announcements and acknowledgments, he glanced down at his notes and let a slow smile spread. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's lead sponsor has chosen to remain anonymous, until now. A murmur rippled through the hall. He paused, letting the anticipation build. It is my honor to announce that the largest contribution for tonight's fundraiser and the establishment of a new scholarship for local students pursuing careers in medical technology comes from Tenebrous Quaid. The room seemed to freeze for a half second, then erupted into applause. Heads turned toward me. I stood, the applause folding around me like a wave, and made my way to the stage. The MC shook my hand and gestured for me to take the microphone. Ms. Quaid's generosity will ensure opportunities for our students for years to come, he said. And given her own career in medical technology, this gift couldn't be more fitting. I looked out over the room. Garrick's face was pale, his jaw tight. Vianney's hands were clasped, knuckles white. Lucan's eyes darted toward the exit and back to me. Thank you, I began, my voice clear and even. This community has shaped my life in more ways than I can count. It's where I learned the value of hard work, of persistence, and of investing in the future. These scholarships are meant to help those who are ready to build, to innovate, to contribute, not just to their careers, but to the place they call home. I didn't mention the rumors. I didn't mention the months of calculated erasure. I didn't have to. The contrast between their narrative and the moment before them was enough. When I stepped down from the stage, the shift in the room was tangible. People came forward, shaking my hand, thanking me, some leaning in to say quietly, I'm sorry, I didn't know the truth. Garrick approached, his smile stiff. Congratulations, he said, extending his hand. I shook it briefly, feeling the restraint in his grip. Vianney hovered nearby, but didn't meet my eyes. Lucan stayed back, speaking to no one. I left before the event ended, stepping into the cool night air with the hum of conversation still behind me. The narrative they'd worked so hard to control had slipped from their hands in front of the very people they'd used to isolate me. They thought the show was over, but I was just setting up the encore. 3 days after the fundraiser, Garrick called me. His voice was deliberately even, with that formal politeness he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. I think it's time we had a family conversation, he said. Clear the air after everything. It didn't take much to guess the real motive. Damage control. The public reveal had thrown them off balance, and they needed to patch the cracks in their image. Still, I agreed. I wasn't going to waste the opportunity to put my boundaries into words they couldn't twist. I arrived at their house early in the evening. The driveway was empty except for Garrick's truck and Lucan's SUV. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and the lemon polish Vianney used on the floors. Lucan sat stiffly on the couch, eyes on his phone. Vianney emerged from the kitchen with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Thanks for coming, Tenebrous, she said, her tone just a little too careful. I took a seat in the armchair across from them, setting my bag beside me. I'd come here with one thought. This wasn't about approval. This was about making my position immovable. Garrick opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Before we start, you're going to listen, all of you. No interruptions. Silence. I began. I laid out the timeline from the very first rumor. The whispers in the cafe, the cropped photos, the public call-outs, the locked door, the gala humiliation, right up to the moment my name was announced at the fundraiser. I didn't need to raise my voice. The weight of the facts did the work. I named each action, each person involved, and I made it clear I knew exactly how it had been orchestrated. I have proof, I said, my gaze fixed on Garrick. I'm not handing it over, but I have it. Every screenshot, every recording, every witness. He shifted in his seat. You're exaggerating. No, I cut in, steady. You've spoken over me for years. Tonight, you're going to listen. I told them plainly, Any further attempt to spread lies or damage my reputation would be met with legal action. I wasn't bluffing, and they knew it. The room was still when I finished. Not because they agreed, but because they understood. I held the leverage now. I let the silence stretch before moving on. After the fundraiser, people I've known my whole life came to me. They apologized. They admitted they'd believed you, and they were wrong. Some even want to work with me on new projects. Vianney's lips pressed into a line. Garrick looked away. Your attempts to erase me, I said, have done the opposite. You've made me more visible, more respected. That's the irony, isn't it? Lucan muttered. Family loyalty goes both ways. I turned to him. Loyalty isn't blind obedience, it's earned. And you've done nothing to earn mine. For the first time in months, I felt the power shift settle fully on my side. I stood. Here's where we are. I'll be polite at public events. I won't cause a scene. But I'm done with private family business. I won't sit through another meeting like this. I won't be pulled into your games, and I won't let you define me to anyone. Garrick tried to speak, but I didn't let him. You don't get to decide who I am anymore. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. The night air was cold against my face, but I felt lighter than I had in years. This chapter was closed. Their control over me was over. I thought this was the end of the fight, until I saw what was waiting in my mailbox the next morning. 1 week after the family meeting, I walked into the harborfront event hall for the community luncheon. The wide windows looked out over the still water, sunlight bouncing off the surface in shifting patterns. Inside, the low hum of conversation filled the air, mixed with the clinking of cutlery and the occasional burst of laughter. I knew they were here. I'd seen Garrick's name on the attendee list and overheard someone mention that Vianney and Lucan had arrived early. It didn't matter. This was the last time I'd share a room with them outside of chance encounters. Today was about setting the tone, on my terms, before stepping away entirely. Halfway through the meal, the committee chair took the microphone. Before we continue, I want to recognize someone whose contributions have not only supported our recent projects, but also laid groundwork for future community programs. Tenebris Quaid, please stand. The room turned toward me. I rose, nodding politely, my smile measured. Thank you, I said. The chair went on about the scholarship fund, the opportunities it would create, the people it would help. I could feel the awkward silence radiating from my family's table. Not one of them clapped. When the applause died down, I added, sometimes family is who you're born to. Sometimes it's who stands beside you when no one else will. I let the words hang, not rushed, not heavy-handed, just true. As I left the podium, I walked directly past their table. Garrick looked at his plate. Vianney's lips pressed thin, and Lucan shifted uncomfortably. I didn't slow, didn't acknowledge them. The mic drop wasn't in volume, it was in absence. Cameras caught it, and I knew exactly how it would read. Later that day, back at my apartment, I drafted a formal letter. It was short, precise, and left no room for misinterpretation. From this point forward, all personal contact was to go through my attorney. The letter also barred them from using my name or likeness in any context, public or private, without my written consent. I sent copies to my lawyer and to Morwenna, my quiet way of ensuring allies knew the chapter was closed. The act wasn't fueled by anger, it was release. I wasn't waiting for them to change, I was done giving them the space to try. 2 days later, I carried the last of my boxes into my new home. A modest but beautiful place just 3 streets from Morwenna's shop, with a wide view of the harbor. She'd insisted on helping me unpack, and by late afternoon, we stood in the kitchen, mugs of tea in hand. To new beginnings built on truth, she said, clinking her mug against mine. I looked around at the stacks of books, the light streaming in from the windows, the absence of tension in the air. And to the people who've shown me what loyalty really looks like, I added. As we unpacked, we talked about the future, expanding the scholarship fund, volunteering more at the local clinic, creating mentorship programs for young people in medical technology. The plans felt real, rooted in my values, not in the approval of people who'd tried to strip me down to a caricature. Maya Angelou's words came to mind. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. I'd lived those words without even realizing it. That evening, when Morwenna left, I sat by the front window with my notebook. The harbor lights blinked steadily in the dark, and I outlined the projects that would carry me forward. No revenge, no need to keep score, just work worth doing, surrounded by people who wanted me to succeed because they believed in me, not because they could use me. I didn't feel regret, only relief, and a clarity I hadn't had in years. I hadn't just disproved their lies. I'd built a life beyond their reach. I had closed the book on them, but life has a way of handing you a sequel when you least expect it.